Look at how silvery that is. We got something going on there. Today, we're going to be replacing the rear differential bearings in a 2015 F-150. This is the afterwork garage. So after I fixed my front wheel bearing, it revealed a new noise that I could then start hearing, which has been getting progressively worse over the past, 5,000 miles or so. It's started out as a whirring when I was kind of turning, and then started clunking. And as soon as that happened, I knew it had to be the differential, because what happens is when the bearings start wearing out, there gets to be excessive play in there. And then as your drive shaft engages the gears, all that slop gets pulled up and it results in a clunk before your truck starts moving again. I actually already took a look last time I was up here. Oh boy. Oh, that's so bad. But the parts weren't available for me to fix it, and I didn't have time, so here we are. I got sick of using a razor blade under here to get rid of this gasket, and I feel like it's probably not the safest way to go, so I made a little tool here out of just a piece of metal. Basically just round it down into a point so it can kind of slip in there. Oh yeah, look at that. That at one point was newish fluid not so long ago, and it's just a mess. Look at how glittery that is. Okay, there we are. There's like glitter splashes here. Okay, so this is what you would call backlash, and this is the slop, not slop, but the excess tolerance between the pinion gear back here and this ring gear, and this is normal. We should have some backlash, but what I can already see is that some of it is coming from back and forward motion in these bearings. So it's the carrier bearings here that look like they have issues. But essentially what I'm going to do is take these bearings out, take a look at the pinion gear, take a look at the pinion bearing, or see what we can see there. This pin right here is what holds the spider gears on. It's kind of in an unfortunate position right now to look at, but we'll get the drive shaft disconnected, and then we'll get the axles out, and then we'll have a better look at this. These are 12mm 12-point sockets. And guess who doesn't have a 12mm 12-point socket? Me. I only have a 13 and a 10. So that is super inconvenient. Don't look. I marked this so that we can put the drive shaft back in the same orientation, because obviously that's a good thing to do. Still one on top. One's on top. What do we got? Both of them on top again. Are we kidding? With all of the bolts finally removed, I used a pry bar to push the drive shaft towards the front of the vehicle to break up the rust holding it to the differential. There we go. Okay, we had a little camera equipment malfunction there. But now that we're back at it, I spun this around. We're going to take that little bolt out, and that is actually the retaining bolt for this pin right here. There we go. And this bolt goes all the way through this pin. We might have a problem there. We have to take our socket off. It's not enough clearance. The wrenches are getting a workout today. Take this guy out. Try not to lose him. That would be bad. So we want to be able to see our gears. You want to see that pin in there? This is going to drop out. But we are going to want to keep those spider gears in place, because I don't want to have to put those back in. To get the axles off, I took the wheels off already. We're going to take the brakes off and then push in on the axles. I will show you that in a second. So what I am, oh, that's a bummer. Okay. What I'm gonna do is push this in all the way.
And now we're back at the differential. What I said was a bummer is that the spider gears fell out when I was messing with the axle, which isn't the end of the world. They just have shims behind them, and you have to keep track of where those go so that you can put them back in the same orientation, since they're responsible for keeping the gears centered on the gears on the end of the axle.
So to get the axle out, I'm gonna push it in, and there's this little clip here that you can just pull out. You can grab it with a magnet, or if you get the right angle, you can it'll just fall out. That's what we're looking for.
Here's another view of removing that retaining clip from the other axle.
Now the axle should just pull right out. There we go. If you're not saving the seal, and today we're replacing the bearings, but if you weren't, you'd want to be careful to lift this up so that it doesn't damage the bearings or seal as it comes out. In this case, it doesn't matter.
Before removing the bearing caps, I tried to mark them for reassembly. Unfortunately, I found out chalk does not work for this. Fortunately, looking back at the video, there was a blue paint mark on the passenger side cap, and they were installed with the other markings in opposite directions, side to side.
There. This goes here. We have our shims that I want to keep in place. Factory shims. We have one big thick one on the right. Let's set these over here. This shim. Sounds like we have some issues going on over here. And then how do we deal with this ring? I thought it was just going to come off, but I guess not. Oh, it is a clip on the inside. Cool. Okay, look at that. Alright, with this unit's ready to come out, let's pull it out. Let's put it on the bench.
That is the problem. Look at that. Look how bad those look. Look at that roller right there. It looks like someone took a bite out of it. Crazy. So, well, there's nothing obviously wrong with this bearing. The race doesn't look great. There's some pitting there. And a little bit there. But it's nothing like this one. Look at that. Just all the way around. That's what the noise was. I'm going to just lay these out on the bench as they are, because I don't really know what to do to keep them in there. They're just falling out all over the place. I suppose I could put the pin back in. Should I do that? Let's get the gears back in and the pin back in. I need to put you down because I'm definitely going to need 2 hands for this. There's one. Do it like this, I think. Is that right? No. It's one off. And the shin. This is a giant pain in the ass. This is a pain in the ass. Yep. Okay, so we're gonna get this lined up. So that middle tooth. Let's do a middle tooth there. Middle tooth here. Spin these around, see if we're lined up. There we go, lined up. I'm going to clean it up before I put it all back in, but for now, I'm just going to reinstall this so that it doesn't all fall apart on me. To remove the pressed-on bearings from the differential, I used a bearing separator and a 2-jaw puller. If you have the puller bar that screws into the separator, that would work even better, but either way, you want to find something to push against that's small enough in diameter to fit through the inner race of the bearing, but large enough to push against the metal of the differential. For my setup, I just found a socket that fit.
Are we on the shaft, not the bearing? We are. All right. Here's nothing. gonna make sure that the socket is as kind of even as possible, and let's give it a whirl. Oh, it's much easier. The surface that rides on here is much darker on this side. Wonder if it's just because it got really hot. So the next thing you have to do is get the pinion gear out, because there's 2 bearings in here, and as you can hear, it's kind of crunchy also. So I'm assuming these don't look much better. So that's our differential seal, the pinion seal. We have a pinion gear in there. There's another bearing line in there, and looks like a seal right there. So here's our pinion gear. Slide this guy out. Ooh. So this bearing's pitted as well. You can see a pretty bad one there, but the rest of them have lines in them and kind of nasty stuff. Second bearing's back here. It pops out the back side. There's a seal in there. What do we got going on here? We have a seal. This is the important seal. Then a spacer for the pinion gear that keeps it out the right distance. And then our bearing there. So we need to pull the seal out. Out. That was really tight in there. Okay, well, we need to get this inner race out. So I can punch that out from the back. And you can stay here and watch me. The race of the inner pinion bearing was much more difficult to remove than the outer one, and the angle to hammer on it was pretty awkward without a lift. After a lot of hammering with both a pipe and a long punch, I ended up having to weld a bead around the race to be able to punch it out more easily. This is the same thing I did for trailer bearing races in a previous video, and it really works well when you can't get races off any other way. That said, you do have to be a little careful. Since I had to use a welded bead to get that inner race out, I spent a little bit of time here cleaning everything out super well to make sure there's no little like dingleberries and splatters or anything that could come free or that are in the way of any sort of bearing surface or anything like that. So I went through and then I went over it with brake clean and then blew it out with air, compressed air, just to make sure anything loose came out and, you know, got everything out of the bottom. Well, this is turning into a real master's class on what not to do. But I don't have a press and I don't have a puller long enough or bolts long enough with me to pull this bearing off. So we're going to try this setup and see what happens. That's coming up. Let's tighten this down just a touch more here. Well, there we go. I don't know why everyone doesn't do it that way. I want to note also that there is a shim on the back of this pinion gear, so I'm going to make sure that stays there, along with the shim that was on the back side of the small bearing that went here. This is a little frustrating. This kit is completely the wrong kit for this truck. So I'm going to have to do a little more research. This was surprisingly difficult to get, especially right after New Year's, but I was able to get a set of new bearings from the Ford truck dealer in the Kansas City area, and they were not cheap, but they do match. And actually, I'm going to maybe grab some new paper towel to lay these out on. These are going to be the 2 carrier bearings. I also have an oil seal here. which is the new oil seal. It looks like it actually has grease on it. Oh, they greased the seal part so it slides on to the shaft without resistance and tearing up that sleeve. That's actually really nice. I'm going to stick that back in the pouch to keep it protected.
After cleaning off the differential assembly and pinion gear, I matched up the old and new parts to make sure they were the same, and then started installing the new bearings and races. The goal here is to press or hammer only on the inner part of the bearing so you don't damage the rollers. You also want them to go on as evenly as possible so they don't bind up. Finally, you want to make sure they're fully seated, which is just a matter of pounding them on until they won't go on anymore. But when they're fully seated, I find that subsequent blows with the hammer sound different, and the hammer has a bounce back that it doesn't have when they're not all the way on. I found that the old crush sleeve and a piece of scrap pipe worked wonders in pushing the pinion bearing on over the spindle. I then used the old crush sleeve again, this time on its own, to drive on the differential carrier bearings.
Okay, so we have the bearings installed on the ring gear carrier. I just used the old crush sleeve to press it down. You can really see how it bulges out, but more impressive than that to me is that the crush sleeves actually take a lot to crush down. That's why that pinion nut is so high, it gets torqued to such a high foot-pound. It's like 117 or 120 or something like that. So I also have the inner pinion bearing pressed onto the inner pinion. This one took a little bit more because it's just a little more awkward. The outer one does not get pressed on. This just sits inside of the differential housing. Bearing race for the inner pinion bearing is going to get pushed in right here.
Once I got the race started, I used a piece of galvanized pipe to drive it into place, being careful to make sure it went in straight. While not ideal, as long as I kept the pipe on the side of the bearing race, I was pretty comfortable that it was a softer metal and wasn't going to damage the running surface.
Alright, it looks like it's pretty flush there. I don't feel anything on the back side. It's my nail, can't get it in there, so I think we're good. Let's go ahead and put the one on the outer side. I'm only now noticing all these castings like this right here. It seems to be a tube that oil flows through, and then there's another hole that when the ring gear's spinning and forward, it's kicking oil clearly up this direction. Probably out this way, and then we're pressurizing this little area a little bit, and that might be a little return back to the differential housing. Not completely sure. Either way, let's get it cleaned up and get the new bearing race in there. On the back side, I can also see that that inner bearing is flush, or bearing race is flush up against the housing, so we did a good job pounding that one in. Next, we've got to get the outer one pounded in here. This is the old one. I'm going to go grab the new one. Oh no, what have I done? I used the second one to pound it in and now it's stuck. Also, that was really dumb. Well, we got it out. That'll work. And this one's bottomed out. So, we're looking good there. Okay. For this, we're making a little bit of a pinion gear sandwich. What we got to do, first thing, this pinion gear with the inner bearing is going to come in from the back side. We're going to put our crush sleeve on there, and remember we only get one shot at tightening that down. So we don't want to mess that up. Then on the outside, we're going to throw our bearing and shim in, and then our oil seal. This around and guide it through. Alright, it's on the inner bearing there. Put this guy on. Put this guy on. Oh, there we go. There, it fit right on. Okay. Okay, I'll take that. That's a win. That's a win right there. Took a little pulling. Alright, now oil seal. This is our inside, this is our outside. looks acceptable. Where's this piece here? Oh, the seal rod's on the inside of this. Right there. Just make sure that's clean. There we are. I'm gonna grab our pry bar again, keep this from spinning. So clearly the answer is that these threads are all mangled, rusted, but then the little lock punches they did on them just completely flattened out the thread lands and grooves. So there's no, I'm fighting against that, and I don't want to wreck the threads on the pinion nut. That would be horrendous. I really just need to get a new one of these, but since I'm trying to leave right now, and with the knowledge that I will need to get a new one of these, I'm going to go ahead and just cut off this little flange, just use the nut, and then know that I'll have to get a new one. Okay, so I'm going to throw a little thread lock on there, but this is all covered in oil, so I don't know what effect that's going to have. That is much better right there. That goes on much more smoothly once I've cut that flange off.
What you can't hear me saying over the impact and compressor is that getting the right torque on the pinion nut is extremely important because it sets the preload on the pinion bearings by pulling the two bearings in towards the respective races against the outward pressure of the crush sleeve. Tightening it down too little results in bearings that are loose and will fail prematurely, while tightening it too much puts too much preload on the bearings and will also lead to premature failure. The proper procedure for this involves tightening the nut down to a predetermined foot-pound and then continuing to slowly torque the nut until turning the pinion gear takes 20 inch-pounds of pressure. You also really only get one shot at this. If you tighten it too much, you have to disassemble the whole thing and start over with a new crush sleeve. Having said that, I don't have an inch-pound torque wrench, and despite visiting multiple auto parts stores in the area, I couldn't find one. So I'm using Andrew's Best guest gauge, which isn't ideal, but I know the feeling I'm going for, which is stiff but not hard to turn. 20 inch-pounds is about 1.6 foot-pounds, so using a pry bar or a breaker bar with a socket, you can sort of approximate this. It's kind of like making whipped cream. You gotta go until it seems right, but too much and you have butter.
Okay, the next thing we're going to do is install the differential. So, it's kind of heavy and awkward, but we have our bearings and races on this. These races are not pressed in, they just kind of set there. I wish they'd set there a little better. And then we have to remember our shims on the right and left. Well, it's in minus the shims. Maybe that's the way to do it. And then put the shims in. Or maybe not. I'm going to get these in and torqued down. They get 77 foot-pounds, I believe. And we'll see where we are, both in backlash and gear pattern. Sorry, I'm blocking the view there. Here we are. Everything's looking pretty decent, actually. So this thing is the worst. This little Harbor Freight dial indicator, it's just the only one I could get cheap. But it is like super janky. We're about 8. We're at 8 exactly. 8 thousandths of backlash, which is pretty good, I think. I'm not sure exactly the specs. It's probably, I think it's like 4 to 8 or less than 10. Is definitely good. To be completely honest, I can't change it because I don't have any shims. The only thing I could do is switch the right and left shims, or try to take out one of the pinion gear shims, but that I'd need a new crush sleeve for it, and that's just not an option at the moment. And this is close enough that I think we're going to roll with it. So the next thing I'm going to do is check for our gear pattern, the gear tooth pattern here. the only brush I had, and normally you'd use like Prussian blue or this orange paint goop, but no one had any. Literally, I couldn't find any anywhere. I don't know why, I just couldn't find any. So the closest thing I could find is this green grease. It's a very opaque green. I chose it because of its color, and I don't think the grease is going to interfere too much with the oil that goes in here. It says it's compatible with both lithium and petroleum products, so we're gonna give it a try, see if we can paint these gears. Oh god, this is so messy. It's like so goopy. Okay, so this is obviously not ideal, but maybe we'll get a gear tooth pattern here. We'll see. Now let's see if we can see anything. The answer is not really. What I can see is a line here. So it looks like it's, if anything, in a little far, which would mean the pinion is a little far in, pushed in towards us. But because I can see the line starting about here, going up to here. But I can definitely see the main pressure area was right here. And then on the back side, or this is the drive side, rather, where's our line? There's a line here. That one actually looks a lot better. I can see the grease coming from the, almost the tip, probably an 1/8 of an inch from the end of the tip of the pinion gear, going all the way back to the bottom of it. So there's not much I can do about it again because of the shims, except ride it, see if it makes too much noise. We don't know, we'll see. Plug in the sensor again. Not sensor, plug in the electronic locking differential switch. I'm not sure how well this setup's gonna work for right now. I'll keep you posted. I'm not gonna post this video until I have driven it for at least a few thousand miles and can see if there's any noises, any trouble, if it totally blows up and I need a new rear end. But I will let you know.
So now, it's just a matter of putting the axles back in, reinstalling the differential cover, filling it with oil, and bolting the drive shaft back onto the pinion flange.
Those are back on. It's a big job for a little wrench.
So it's been about 6,000 miles, including several trips back and forth from Dallas to Kansas City since I finished up the bearing replacement job. And I'm happy to report there doesn't seem to be any signs of trouble. There's no weird noises, and on long trips I've checked the differential housing to see if it's getting excessively warm. Now it does get warm just because there's a lot of power going through there, but it's not getting like super hot, which is a good sign. And I haven't seen any signs of leaks either on the axle tube sides, from where I took the wheel axles out by the wheels, or where the pinion gear goes in. So I'm gonna call it a win. I think we kind of skirted some protocols there, obviously, but it turned out pretty well. And I will give you an update if anything changes, but for now, I'm gonna go with it. Now I do want to mention that after about 500 miles, I actually opened the differential completely back up again, drained all the oil out, and refilled it. This was just to flush out any scraps of metal that might still be in there or were caught in the axle tubes. I didn't see anything that looked terribly wrong, but it made me feel good to get some new oil in there as well. Anyways, thanks for watching, and I'll catch you next time on the After Work Garage.